The velvet box sat on my nightstand like a sleeping predator, its deep burgundy surface catching the morning light filtering through our bedroom curtains. 3 days. 3 days it had been there, untouched, while my husband Marcus paced around. It like it might explode. "Don't open it. Can't you see it?" he'd said on my birthday, his voice sharp with an urgency I'd never heard before. His hands had trembled when he placed it there, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Fear? Guilt? I couldn't tell. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." Now, as I sat at my vanity brushing my hair, I could feel its presence behind me in the mirror's reflection. Marcus had already left for work, but not before glancing nervously at the box and muttering something about "not yet" under his breath. The rational part of my mind, the part that had gotten me through medical school and 10 years of marriage, whispered that I was being ridiculous. It was a gift. A birthday present from my husband of a decade. What could possibly be dangerous about jewelry? But another part of me, the intuitive voice I'd learned to trust during long nights in the emergency room, sensed something fundamentally wrong about the whole situation. I turned in my chair to face the box directly. It was beautiful, I had to admit. The kind of elegant packaging that suggested expensive jewelry, perhaps the diamond earrings I'd mentioned wanting, or maybe a necklace to match the engagement ring Marcus had given me years ago. The logo embossed in gold on the lid belonged to Cartwright and Associates, the most exclusive jeweler in the city. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus: "Please don't touch the box today. I'll explain everything when I get home. I love you, Elena." Elena. He only used my full name when he was serious, when something was weighing heavily on his mind. Usually, I was Elle or sweetheart, or sometimes just babe when he was distracted by work. I set the phone down and studied the box again. What could possibly require explanation? What kind of gift came with warnings and delays? The sound of our neighbor's lawnmower starting up pulled me from my thoughts. Saturday morning in Millbrook Heights proceeded as usual, with its predictable rhythm of suburban life. I could hear Mrs. Chen next door calling to her children, the distant sound of a dog barking, the soft whoosh of cars passing on Elm Street. Everything normal. Everything exactly as it should be, except for the box. I stood up abruptly, decision crystallizing in my mind. This was absurd. I was a grown woman, a physician, someone who made life and death decisions daily. I wasn't going to be held hostage by my husband's mysterious anxiety about a birthday gift. My fingers closed around the velvet surface, surprised by how warm it felt. The box was heavier than expected, with a substantial weight that suggested something significant inside. The clasp opened with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet bedroom. Inside, nestled in cream-colored silk, lay the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen, but it wasn't the beauty that made my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't the way the large central stone caught the light, throwing rainbow prisms across the bedroom walls. It wasn't even the exquisite craftsmanship of the platinum setting, or the delicate way smaller diamonds had been arranged around the center stone like stars around a moon. It was the fact that I recognized it, not just recognized it, I knew it intimately. Every facet, every curve, every tiny imperfection in one of the smaller stones that had always reminded me of a question mark. This was my grandmother's ring. The ring that had been stolen from our house 12 years ago. The ring that had broken my grandmother's heart and contributed to her decline in her final months. The ring that had disappeared along with several other family heirlooms during a break-in that the police had never solved. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The ring that Marcus had always claimed to know nothing about. My hands began to shake as fragments of memory crashed together in my mind. The timing of when Marcus and I had met, just 2 months after the break-in. His evasiveness when I'd talked about the stolen jewelry. The way he'd always changed the subject when I mentioned my grandmother's ring, how he'd suggest we should move forward instead of dwelling on the past. The room seemed to tilt around me as I sank back into my chair, the ring box still clutched in my trembling fingers. All these years, I'd grieved for this ring. I'd blamed myself for not having better security, for not taking better care of my grandmother's most precious possession. I'd carried guilt about her heartbreak, wondering if losing the ring had hastened her death, and Marcus had known where it was all along. The implications crashed over me like a wave. If he'd had the ring, then he'd been involved in the break-in. Which meant everything I thought I knew about how we met, about our relationship, about him, was built on a lie.my phone rang, making me jump. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I stared at it, unable to reconcile the man I'd loved for 10 years with the person who could have done this. The person who had let me suffer, had watched me blame myself, had built our entire relationship on a foundation of theft and deception. I let it go to voicemail. A memory surfaced from our second date, sharp and clear despite the years between. We'd been walking through the park, and I'd told him about my grandmother, about how much she'd meant to me. I'd cried when I mentioned the ring, and he'd held me, stroking my hair and telling me that sometimes the universe took things away for reasons we couldn't understand. Maybe, he'd said, losing the ring was meant to help you learn to find value in new relationships, new love. I'd thought it was profound at the time. Now it made me sick. The voicemail notification chimed, and with hands that felt disconnected from my body, I played the message. I know you're probably confused right now. If you've opened the box, and I'm guessing you have because I know you, then we need to talk. I can explain everything. It's not what you think. I love you. And I need you to trust me just a little bit longer. I'll be home by noon. Please don't do anything until we can talk. I set the phone down and looked at the ring again, trying to process the magnitude of what I discovered. This wasn't just about stolen jewelry. This was about the fundamental dishonesty at the core of my marriage. This was about 10 years of lies, 10 years of watching me grieve something he could have returned at any time. A sound at the front door made my heart race, keys jingling, the soft scrape of the lock turning. But it was too early for Marcus to be home. It was barely 10:30. Elle? His voice carried up the stairs, unusually strained. Elle, are you home? I closed the ring box quickly, my mind racing. Why was he back so early? Had he been monitoring me somehow? The thought sent a chill down my spine. If he'd stolen my grandmother's ring, what else was he capable of? I'm upstairs, I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. I could hear his footsteps on the stairs, faster than usual. When he appeared in the doorway, his face was pale, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. You opened it, he said, his eyes immediately going to the box in my hands. Yes, I replied, standing up to face him. I opened it, Marcus. And I think you have some explaining to do. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, I saw something I'd never seen there before: fear. Not just nervousness or anxiety, but genuine, deep-seated fear. Elena, he said, using my full name again, I need you to listen to me. I need you to really listen, because everything I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. But it's the truth, and I should have told you years ago. I held up my hand to stop him. Before you say anything else, I want you to answer one question honestly. Were you involved in the break-in at my house 12 years ago? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear my heart beating, could hear the neighbor's lawnmower still running, could hear a dog barking somewhere in the distance. Normal Saturday sounds, while my world crumbled around me. Yes, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But not in the way you think. The simple admission hit me like a physical blow. 10 years of marriage, and I'd been living with a stranger. Sleeping beside someone who had violated my home, my family, my trust in the most fundamental way possible. Get out, I said quietly. Elle, please, you have to let me explain, get out. The words erupted from me with a force that surprised us both. Get out of this room, get out of this house. I can't even look at you right now. Marcus took a step forward, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. Elena, if you don't let me explain, people are going to die. The ring isn't just a ring. Stop. I was backing away from him now, the ring box pressed against my chest. Like a shield. Just stop talking. Whatever sick game you've been playing, whatever twisted reason you had for doing this to me, I don't want to hear it. It's not a game. The desperation in his voice made me pause. Elle, please. Sit down. Let me show you something. Against my better judgment, I found myself hesitating. The fear in his eyes was real, and underneath it, I glimpsed something else, a deep, bone-deep exhaustion, as if he'd been carrying an enormous weight for years. 5 minutes, I said finally. You have 5 minutes to explain why you've been lying to me for our entire relationship. And then I want you gone. Marcus nodded quickly, relief flooding his features. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he scrolled through it. The break-in, he began, not looking up from the screen. I wasn't one of the thieves. I was trying to stop them. He turned the phone toward me, and I found myself looking at a photograph that made no sense. It showed Marcus, but a younger version, maybe early 20s, wearing what looked like a uniform. Some kind of security badge was visible on his shirt. I was working private security back then, he said. Specialized in art and jewelry recovery. Your grandmother's ring, it was part of a much bigger operation. International art theft, money laundering, some very dangerous people. I stared at the photo, trying to process what he was telling me. That's impossible. You were in graduate school when we met. You were studying architecture. I was studying architecture, he confirmed. But I was also working undercover for an organization that specializes in recovering stolen cultural artifacts. The ring. The ring isn't just valuable because it belonged to your grandmother. It's been at the center of a criminal network for over 50 years. The room seemed to spin around me. You're lying. I wish I was. He scrolled to another photo on his phone. This one showed the ring, but in a different setting, what looked like a museum or gallery, with a small placard next to it. The text was too small to read clearly, but I could make out partial words. Disappeared 1943. Nazi looting, missing for decades. Your grandmother never told you where the ring came from, did she? Marcus asked quietly. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. She said it was a family heirloom. That it had been her mother's, and her grandmother's before that. Marcus sat down carefully on the other end of the bed, maintaining distance between us. Your great-great-grandmother was a Jewish woman living in Vienna in the 1940s. The ring was part of a collection stolen by the Nazis. Your grandmother's family, they didn't all make it out. The words hit me like physical blows. My grandmother had never talked about her early life, had always changed the subject when I asked about her family history. I'd assumed it was just painful memories of immigration, of leaving everything behind for a new life in America. The ring surfaced periodically over the decades, Marcus continued. Always at the center of some criminal enterprise, always disappearing again before authorities could recover it. When it showed up in your grandmother's possession, my organization started monitoring it. Your organization? My voice sounded hollow, distant. Think of us as specialized recovery agents. We work with international law enforcement, museums, families who are trying to recover stolen heritage. When we learned about the ring, we thought your grandmother was part of the criminal network. The implications were staggering. You thought my grandmother was a criminal? We were wrong, he said quickly. We didn't realize until much later that she was actually the rightful heir. That somehow, despite everything that had happened to her family, she had managed to keep this one piece of her heritage. I looked down at the ring box in my hands, seeing it with completely different eyes. Not just my grandmother's ring, but a piece of history. A link to family members I'd never known existed, victims of one of history's greatest atrocities. The break-in. I whispered. You said you were trying to stop it. Marcus nodded. We'd been tracking a group that specializes in Nazi-looted art. They'd learned about the ring, and we knew they were planning to steal it. I was supposed to get there first, to warn your grandmother, to convince her to let us help her protect it. But you were too late. I was too late, he confirmed. By the time I got there, they were already inside. I tried to stop them, but... He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a long scar along his forearm that I'd noticed many times over the years. He'd always said it was from a childhood accident. One of them had a knife, he said simply. I managed to save most of your grandmother's other jewelry, but they got away with the ring. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this story with everything. I thought I knew about our relationship. So how did you get it back? For the first time since he'd started talking, Marcus smiled slightly. That's where the story gets complicated. Marcus stood up and walked to our bedroom window, his hands clasped behind his back in that familiar gesture he made when he was thinking through a complex problem. From where I sat on the bed, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way He kept glancing at his reflection in the glass as if checking for something, or someone, behind him. After the thieves escaped with the ring, he began, his voice measured and careful, my organization launched a full investigation. We traced them through 3 countries, Germany, Switzerland, and eventually back here to the States. But every time we got close, they seemed to know we were coming. I clutched the ring box tighter, feeling the weight of history in my hands. Someone was feeding them information. Exactly. He turned back to face me, and I saw something new in his expression, a hardness I'd never noticed before, as if a mask had slipped. It took us 18 months to realize we had a mole. Someone inside our organization was protecting the network, helping them stay ahead of us. The morning sun streaming through our windows felt incongruously cheerful given the darkness of what Marcus was revealing. I could hear children playing in the Chen's backyard next door, their laughter a stark contrast to the weight settling over our bedroom. Who? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a pain I'd heard only once before, the night his father had died 3 years ago. My handler, the man who recruited me, trained me, became like a father to me. David Kellerman. The name meant nothing to me, but I could see what it meant to Marcus. Betrayal had layers, apparently, and he'd been carrying this particular wound for years. David had been with the organization for 25 years, Marcus continued. He was supposed to retire after we recovered the ring. Instead, we discovered he'd been selling information to criminal networks, helping them stay ahead of recovery operations. Your grandmother's ring was just one piece in a much larger game. I set the ring box carefully on the nightstand, my hands suddenly feeling unsteady. How did you find out? The hard way. Marcus walked to our dresser and opened the bottom drawer, the one I never touched because he kept his work files there. He pulled out a manila folder, worn at the edges as if it had been handled many times. I started noticing patterns in our failed operations. Always the same, we'd get close, and then the criminals would disappear just hours before we arrived. He handed me the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, what looked like surveillance reports. The papers were covered in Marcus's handwriting, notes, dates, connections drawn between different pieces of information. I spent 2 years building this case, he said. 2 years pretending I hadn't figured out what David was doing, while secretly documenting every leak, every failed operation, every time he steered us away from a solid lead. I flipped through the pages, trying to make sense of the complex web Marcus had mapped out. Names, locations, dates, it looked like the work of someone obsessed, someone who had sacrificed sleep and peace of mind to uncover the truth. This is why you've been having nightmares, I realized suddenly. For months, Marcus had been waking up in cold sweats, muttering in his sleep about things I couldn't understand. I'd suggested he see someone about the stress, but he'd always deflected, claiming work was just busy. Among other reasons. His smile was bitter. It's hard to sleep when you realize the person you trust most in the world has been lying to you for years. The irony of that statement hit both of us at the same time. Marcus's face flushed, and he looked away. I know how this sounds, he said. Quietly. I know I have no right to talk about trust when I've been keeping this from you. But I was trying to protect you. If I'd told you the truth about the ring, about David, about any of this, you would have become a target. A target for who? The network David was working with. They're not just thieves, They're something much worse. Marcus pulled out his phone again, scrolling to what looked like a news article. Recognize this? I took the phone and found myself looking at a headline from the Chicago Tribune, art dealer found dead in apparent suicide. The article was dated 6 months ago. A man named Robert Harrison had been found in his gallery, apparently having taken his own life after financial difficulties. I don't understand what this has to do with, Robert Harrison was helping us track stolen artwork through the Chicago art scene, Marcus interrupted. He'd identified 3 pieces that were connected to the same network that stole your grandmother's ring. 2 weeks before he was supposed to testify to federal authorities, he was found dead. A chill ran down my spine. You think he was murdered? I know he was murdered. Robert called me the night before he died. He was scared, said he'd discovered something big about the network's leadership. He was going to tell me the next day. Marcus's jaw tightened. Instead, I got a call from the Chicago police. I scrolled through more of the article, noting details I'd missed on first reading. The investigation had been closed quickly, the suicide ruling accepted without much apparent scrutiny. But there was something in the reporter's tone that suggested not everyone had been satisfied with the official explanation. How many others? I asked, dreading the answer. That we know of? 7 people in the last 3 years. All connected to investigations into Nazi-looted art. All ruled suicides or accidents. Marcus sat back down on the bed, careful to maintain space between us. The network has resources, money, influence, people and law enforcement. They don't just steal art, they eliminate anyone who gets too close to exposing them. I thought about my grandmother, about the way she declined so rapidly after the break-in. At the time, I'd attributed it to the violation of her home, the loss of irreplaceable family heirlooms. But now I wondered if there had been more to it. Did they threaten her? I asked. My grandmother? Marcus's silence was answer enough. What did they do? My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. She started getting phone calls about a week after the break-in. Anonymous calls, always at night. Someone telling her that the ring belonged to them, that she had no right to it. That if she went to the police, there would be consequences. I felt sick. She never told me. She was trying to protect you, just like I've been trying to protect you. She contacted my organization instead, said she wanted to help us recover the ring and shut down whoever was harassing her. But she died before that could happen. She died because David made sure the network knew she was cooperating with us. Marcus's voice carried a rage I'd never heard before. They couldn't get to her directly, she was too well protected after she contacted us. So they made sure she knew what they were capable of. He pulled up another photo on his phone. This one showed an elderly woman I didn't recognize, but something about her posture reminded me of my grandmother. Sarah Goldstein, Marcus said. She lived in the same assisted living facility as your grandmother. Sarah had been helping us track another piece of stolen artwork, a painting that belonged to her family before the war. I stared at the photo, beginning to understand. What happened to her? Car accident. 3 days before she was supposed to give a deposition. The driver who hit her was never found. Marcus's voice was flat, emotionless. Your grandmother watched the news coverage. She understood the message. The room felt like it was closing in around me. My grandmother hadn't just died of grief and violation, she died of fear, knowing that people were willing to kill to keep their secrets buried. The heart attack, I whispered, remembering those final days in the hospital, the way she'd seemed to give up fighting. Terror does things to the body, Marcus said gently. Especially to someone her age. The doctors said her heart just couldn't take the stress. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to process what I was learning. This wasn't just about our marriage anymore, or even about stolen jewelry. This was about my grandmother's death, about a criminal network that killed people to protect its secrets. So how did you get the ring back? I asked, trying to focus on something concrete. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes that made me take a step back. Not fear this time, but something harder. Something that spoke of decisions that couldn't be undone. I killed David Kellerman, he said simply. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank back down onto the bed, staring at my husband, this stranger, who had just confessed to murder as casually as he might have mentioned picking up groceries. You what? It wasn't supposed to happen that way, Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was admitting. I confronted him with the evidence, tried to get him to turn himself in, to help us shut down the network from the inside. He pulled a gun instead. I couldn't breathe. The man I'd been married to for 10 years, the man who couldn't kill a spider without feeling guilty, had killed someone. It was self-defense, I managed to say, though even as I spoke the words, I realized I was grasping for some way to make this acceptable, some way to reconcile this revelation with the person I thought I knew. Maybe. Probably. I don't know anymore. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, making it stick up in the way that usually made me want to smooth it down. Now the familiar gesture just made me more aware of how much I didn't know about him. What I do know is that when I searched David's house afterward, I found your grandmother's ring, along with documentation of 12 other murders the network had committed. He pulled another folder from the dresser drawer, thicker than the first. This one was full of police reports, death certificates, photographs that made me look away quickly. David kept records, Marcus explained. Insurance, maybe, or maybe he was just thorough. But he documented everything: who they'd killed, why, how they'd covered it up. Your grandmother wasn't the only elderly person who died of natural causes. After getting too close to the truth, I felt like I was drowning in information, each new revelation pulling me further from the surface of the life I thought I knew. Why didn't you turn this over to the police? Because half the police departments mentioned in these files have officers on the network's payroll. Marcus's laugh was harsh. David wasn't just selling information to criminals, he was selling it to corrupt cops, federal agents, customs officials. The network has people everywhere. A new fear crept into my consciousness. If you killed David, if you have all this evidence, why are you still alive? Why haven't they come after you? Marcus's expression grew even more grim. Who says they haven't? He stood up and walked to our bedroom door, closing it firmly before turning the lock. The click sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Do you remember the car accident I had 8 months ago? He asked. The one where I said I fell asleep at the wheel? I nodded. He'd been hospitalized for 3 days with a concussion and broken ribs. I'd stayed by his bedside, guilt-ridden that I hadn't noticed how exhausted he'd been. I didn't fall asleep. Someone ran me off the road. Professional job, they knew exactly where to hit my car to make it look accidental. Marcus pulled up his shirt, revealing scars I'd attributed to the accident. The broken ribs weren't from the crash. They were from the beating they gave me while I was unconscious. My hands were shaking now. What did they want? The evidence. David's files. And they wanted to know what I'd done with the ring. Marcus sat down again, and this time he didn't maintain distance. He reached for my hands, and despite everything, I let him take them. They think I've hidden it somewhere, that I'm planning to sell it or use it as leverage against them. But you brought it home. You gave it to me. Because keeping it hidden wasn't working anymore. They're getting desperate, more aggressive. The threats are escalating, and I realized I can't protect you if you don't know what we're dealing with. A horrible thought occurred to me. Our marriage. Was any of it real, or was I just convenient? Close to the ring, close to my grandmother? Marcus's grip on my hands tightened. Meeting you was an accident. A beautiful accident that I've never regretted, not for a single day. But staying with you, marrying you, yes, at first it was strategic. I thought being close to you would help me understand more about the ring's history, about your grandmother. The honesty was devastating, but somehow less painful than more lies would have been. When did that change? I asked quietly. Our third date. Do you remember? We went to that terrible Italian restaurant, and you told me about wanting to travel. About all the places you'd never been but dreamed of seeing. And I realized I wanted to see those places with you. Not because it served some mission, but because I was falling in love with you. I did remember. I'd been embarrassed about how much I'd talked that night, about how I'd revealed dreams I'd never shared with anyone. Marcus had listened with an attention that had made me feel like the most important person in the world. Everything after that was real, he continued. Every day, every conversation, every moment we've shared. The only thing that wasn't real was my ability to tell you the truth about who I was and what I was carrying. A sound from downstairs made us both freeze. The front door opening, footsteps in the hallway. Marcus was on his feet instantly, moving with a speed and grace that seemed at odds with the man who usually stumbled over our coffee table. He pressed himself against the wall beside our bedroom door, listening intently. "Elle," a voice called from downstairs. "Elle, are you home? It's Rachel. My sister. I'd forgotten she was supposed to stop by this morning to borrow a dress for her job interview on Monday." Marcus relaxed slightly, but I noticed he kept his position by the door. "How much does she know about the ring?" he asked quietly. "Nothing. I never told her about the break-in. She was in college, dealing with her own problems. I didn't want to worry her." "Good. We need to keep it that way." Marcus moved to the dresser and pulled out what looked like a small electronic device. "Motion sensor," he explained, seeing my confused expression. "I've had the house monitored since the car accident." "Elle?" Rachel's voice was closer now, at the bottom of the stairs. "I'll be right down," I called back, my voice somehow managing to sound normal despite everything that had just happened. Marcus grabbed my arm gently as I started toward the door. We can't let anyone else get involved in this. Not Rachel, not your parents, not anyone. The more people who know, the more people become targets. I nodded, understanding the logic even as I hated the isolation it implied. What happens now? I asked. We can't just pretend everything is normal. We can't go back to the way things were. Marcus looked at the ring box on the nightstand, then back at me. Now we end this. We use the ring to draw them out, and we finish what David started before he betrayed us. That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is incredibly dangerous, Marcus. Agreed. But they're not going to stop. As long as that ring exists, as long as I have David's evidence, they'll keep coming. The only way this ends is if we end it. Rachel's footsteps were on the stairs now. In a few seconds, she'd be knocking on our door, and I'd have to pretend that everything was fine, that I hadn't just learned my husband was a killer and my marriage was built on a foundation of stolen artifacts and international crime. Elle? Are you okay up there? I looked at Marcus, at this man I'd thought I knew, who had just revealed himself to be a stranger carrying secrets that could get us both killed. And despite everything, the lies, the danger, the complete upheaval of everything I'd believed about my life, I found myself making a choice that would have seemed impossible an hour ago. I'm with you, I whispered, barely audible even to myself. Marcus's relief was palpable. Are you sure? I thought about my grandmother, about the fear she'd carried in her final days. About Robert Harrison and Sarah Goldstein and all the other people who had died to keep these secrets buried. About the ring that represented not just my family's history, but the countless families who had been destroyed by the same evil that now threatened us. I'm sure, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. But we do this together. No more lies, no more protecting me by keeping me in the dark. If we're going to end this, we do it as partners. The knock on our bedroom door was soft but insistent. Elle? I heard voices. Is Marcus home? I thought he had to work today. I looked at my husband one more time, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in 10 years. Not the Marcus I'd thought I married, but the real Marcus, scarred, dangerous, carrying burdens that had shaped him in ways I was only beginning to understand. Coming, I called to Rachel, then turned back to Marcus. How long do we have? Days, maybe less. Opening the ring box will have triggered something. They monitor that kind of activity. They'll know the ring is active again. I picked up the box, feeling its weight not just as jewelry now, but as history, as responsibility, as the key to ending a nightmare that had already cost too many lives. Then we'd better get started, I said, and opened the bedroom door to face my sister with what I hoped looked like a normal Saturday morning smile. But as Rachel hugged me and chattered about her upcoming interview, I could feel Marcus behind me, watchful and tense. And I knew that whatever normal had meant before this morning, it was gone forever. The ring sat in its box on our nightstand, beautiful and deadly, waiting to help us finish a war that had started before either of us was born. Rachel's hug lingered longer than usual, and I could feel her studying my face as we pulled apart. My sister had always been perceptive, it was what made her such a good journalist, but right now her intuition was the last thing I needed. You look terrible, she said bluntly, her dark eyes scanning my face with professional thoroughness. Have you been sleeping? You have that hollow look you get when you're working too many double shifts. Just tired, I managed, acutely aware of Marcus behind me, still positioned near the door like a guard. Coffee hasn't kicked in yet. Rachel glanced over my shoulder at him, and I saw her expression shift slightly. Something in Marcus's posture must have registered as off to her trained eye. Morning, Marcus, she said carefully. I thought you had that big presentation today. Postponed, Marcus replied, his voice carrying just the right note of casual disappointment. Client emergency came up yesterday. I marveled at how smoothly he lied, how naturally the deception rolled off his tongue. How many times over the years had I witnessed this same casual dishonesty without recognizing it for what it was? Well, since you're both here, Rachel continued, settling onto our bed with the familiar ease of someone who'd grown up in this house, maybe you can help me decide between the navy dress and the charcoal one. This interview is really important, it's for the investigative team at Channel 7. My blood ran cold. Rachel worked for a small local paper, but she'd been trying to break into television journalism for years. Investigative reporting was exactly the kind of work that might put her in contact with the same stories, the same networks that had already claimed so many lives. That's wonderful, I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice while my mind raced. What kind of stories would you be covering? Cold cases, mostly. Unsolved murders, missing persons, financial crimes that never got proper attention. Rachel's excitement was palpable. There's this whole series they want to do on art theft and money laundering. Apparently, there's been a huge uptick in stolen artwork moving through the city, and the police aren't equipped to handle the international connections. Behind me, I felt Marcus go completely still. The silence stretched just a moment too long before I managed to respond. Sounds dangerous, I said weakly. That's what makes it interesting. Rachel grinned, the same reckless smile she'd worn as a kid when she was about to attempt something that would definitely get her in trouble. The producers said they've been getting tips from all over, former dealers, gallery owners, even some federal agents who think local law enforcement isn't taking the problem seriously enough. I glanced back at Marcus and saw my own fear reflected in his eyes. If Rachel got involved in investigating art theft, especially with federal connections, she would inevitably stumble across the same network that had killed David Kellerman and Robert Harrison. The network that was already hunting us. Maybe you should stick with local stories for now, I suggested, trying to sound casual. Build up your television experience before tackling anything too complex. Rachel's expression shifted, her journalistic instincts clearly picking up on something in my tone. What's wrong? You're acting really strange, and Marcus looks like he's seen a ghost. Before I could answer, a soft chime came from Marcus's phone. He pulled it out, and I saw his face go white as he read whatever message had appeared. We need to go, he said quietly, his voice carrying an urgency that made my stomach clench. Now. Go where? Rachel asked, looking between us with growing alarm. What's happening? Marcus was already moving, pulling clothes from our closet with efficient, practiced motions. Pack light. 1 bag. Essential documents, medications, anything you can't replace. Marcus, you're scaring me, I said, even as I found myself moving toward the dresser, some primitive survival instinct responding to his urgency. He held up his phone, showing me the screen. The message was short and terrifying in its simplicity. The chess pieces are moving. Knight takes pawn in 30 minutes. Time to go. Who sent that? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. My contact at the agency. The one who's been monitoring the network's communications. Marcus was throwing items into a duffel bag with military precision. They've made the connection between David's death and my location. They're coming. Rachel stood up from the bed, her face pale but determined. I don't know what kind of trouble you two are in, but I'm not leaving until someone explains what's happening. Rachel, please, I begged, grabbing essential items from my dresser while trying to think of something that would make her leave without getting her more involved. This isn't your problem. Like hell it isn't. You're my sister. She crossed her arms, taking on the stubborn stance that had gotten her through countless arguments with our parents. And I'm a journalist. I can tell when people are running from something dangerous. Marcus stopped packing and turned to face her directly. When he spoke, his voice carried a gravity that made the air in the room feel heavy. Rachel, what I'm about to tell you could get you killed just for knowing it. Are you absolutely sure you want that responsibility? For a moment, Rachel wavered. I could see her weighing her curiosity against the genuine fear in Marcus's voice. Then her chin came up in the gesture I recognized from childhood arguments, and I knew we'd lost. Tell me, she said. Marcus looked at me, and I nodded reluctantly. If Rachel was determined to stay involved, it was better that she understand the real danger she was walking into. Your sister's grandmother's ring was stolen 12 years ago by an international network of art thieves, Marcus said, his words coming fast and urgent. The network has connections to Nazi-looted artwork, money laundering, and at least 7 murders in the last 3 years. I've been working undercover to expose them, and they just figured out where we live. Rachel blinked, processing this information with the same methodical approach she brought to her reporting. The ring Elena inherited? The one that was stolen in the break-in? I got it back, Marcus said, pulling the velvet box from the nightstand. But getting it back meant killing someone, and now the entire network wants me dead. Jesus, Rachel breathed, sinking back onto the bed. How long has this been going on? Too long, I said, zipping up my own bag with hands that trembled slightly. And it ends now, one way or another. Marcus's phone chimed again, another message that made him swear under his breath. 20 minutes, he announced. They're moving. Faster than expected. Where do we go? I asked, shouldering my bag and grabbing my medical bag from the closet. Whatever was coming, I had a feeling we might need first aid supplies. Safe house. About an hour north of the city. Marcus was checking something on his phone, maps, maybe, or communications with his mysterious contact. Rachel, you have two choices. Come with us and accept that your life as you know it is over, or leave now and never mention this conversation to anyone. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, weighing options with the same analytical approach that made her a good reporter. If I come with you, she said finally, do I get the full story? Everything you haven't told Elena? Marcus nodded grimly. Everything. Including the parts that will give you nightmares. And if I leave? You go back to your normal life, but you'll always be wondering. And there's a small chance, very small, but real, that they might come after you anyway, just to be sure you don't know anything. I watched my sister process this impossible choice, hating Marcus for putting her in this position even as I understood the logic of it. Rachel had always been drawn to danger, to stories that mattered, but this was beyond anything she'd ever encountered. The investigative position at Channel 7, she said suddenly. The art theft series they want to do. That's connected to this, isn't it? Marcus's expression grew even more grim. If you take that job, you'll be dead within a month. The network doesn't leave loose ends, and they've already killed journalists who got too close. A sound from downstairs made us all freeze, the front door opening again, followed by heavy footsteps that definitely didn't belong to any of our neighbors. Back door, Marcus whispered, moving to the window to peer out carefully. 3 men. Possibly more. Professional. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was really happening. People were actually coming to kill us, and the only thing standing between us and death was my husband's apparently extensive experience with this kind of situation. Fire escape, Marcus said, already moving toward our bedroom window. Rachel. I need an answer now. Come with us, or hide in the bathroom until they leave. Rachel looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that reminded me of our grandmother, a quiet determination that had carried our family through generations of hardship. I'm coming, she said, grabbing her purse and the dress she'd originally come to borrow. But I want the whole story, and I want it fast. Marcus had the window open and was already helping me onto the fire escape. The metal was cold under my hands, and I tried not to look down at the ground 2 stories below. Stay quiet, move fast, and don't look back, Marcus instructed, following us onto the narrow platform. The car is parked 2 blocks away. As we began our descent, I could hear voices from inside our house, men speaking in low, urgent tones, systematically searching the rooms. The sound of furniture being moved, drawers being opened, the methodical destruction of the life Marcus and I had built together. Are they going to burn it down? Rachel whispered as we reached the ground level. Probably, Marcus replied, already moving toward the alley behind our house. Standard practice. Eliminate evidence, send a message. I thought about all the things we were leaving behind, photo albums, my grandmother's other jewelry, books we'd collected together, the couch we'd picked out during our first year of marriage. A decade of shared memories reduced to ash and insurance claims. We moved through the alley with Marcus leading, every shadow and sound seeming like a potential threat. I kept expecting shouts behind us, gunshots, some indication that we'd been discovered. But the neighborhood remained eerily quiet, as if the danger was happening in some parallel universe that hadn't quite intersected with the Saturday morning routine of suburban life. The car was exactly where Marcus had said it would be, a nondescript sedan that looked nothing like his usual vehicle. As we climbed in, Rachel in the back seat clutching her dress like a lifeline, Marcus pulled out his phone one more time. Safe house is compromised too, he said after reading the latest message. My contact says they've been watching it for days. So where do we go? I asked, trying to keep panic out of my voice. Marcus started the engine, his face set in the grim expression I was beginning to recognize as his problem-solving mode. Plan B, he said. We improvise. As we pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse in the side mirror of smoke beginning to rise from the direction of our house. Rachel saw it too, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. They really did burn it down, she said, her voice carrying a mixture of shock and fascination that was pure journalist instinct. Welcome to my world, Marcus replied, navigating through side streets with the kind of awareness that suggested he'd planned multiple escape routes from our neighborhood. Now you understand why I couldn't tell Elena the truth. This isn't the kind of life you can share with someone you love. I reached over and took his hand, surprised by my own certainty. You're sharing it with me now. Because I don't have a choice anymore. Because keeping you safe by keeping you ignorant isn't working. Marcus squeezed my fingers, his grip warm and solid despite everything that was falling apart around us. But Elle, I need you to understand what this means. We can't go back. Even if we stop the network, even if we expose everything they've done, our old life is gone. I thought about the house burning behind us, about the normal Saturday morning we'd been having just hours ago, about the 10 years of marriage that had just been revealed as partially built on lies and secrets. Then I thought about my grandmother, dying in fear because she'd tried to do the right thing. About all the people who had been killed to keep these secrets buried. Good, I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. Maybe our old life wasn't as real as I thought it was anyway. Rachel leaned forward from the back seat, her reporter instincts finally overcoming her shock. Okay, you promised me the full story. Start talking. Who exactly are we running from, and what do they really want? Marcus glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and I saw him make the decision to trust her completely. The network calls itself the Heritage Foundation, he began, taking a turn onto a highway that would lead us out of the city. But it's not about preserving heritage. It's about controlling it, owning it, selling it to the highest bidder. Nazi-looted art, Rachel said, pulling out her phone and opening what looked like a recording app. How much are we talking about? Billions of dollars worth of artwork, jewelry, and artifacts that were stolen during World War II and never returned to their rightful owners or families. Marcus's voice took on the tone of a briefing, professional and detailed. The Foundation has been laundering these pieces through legitimate galleries and auction houses for decades, using the profits to fund everything from political campaigns to international terrorism. Rachel's eyes widened. Terrorism? Art theft is the third largest international crime after drugs and weapons trafficking, I said, remembering fragments of conversations I'd overheard over the years, comments from Marcus that had seemed random at the time but now formed a coherent picture. The money has to go somewhere. Exactly. Marcus merged onto the highway, constantly checking his mirrors for signs of pursuit. But the Heritage Foundation is different from other criminal organizations. They don't just steal art, they steal history. They decide which families get their heritage back and which ones don't. They erase entire bloodlines from the historical record. Like Elena's grandmother's family, Rachel said, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice. Elena's great-great-grandmother was Sarah Goldstein, not the same Sarah I mentioned earlier, but her granddaughter. The original Sarah was a prominent Jewish art collector in Vienna before the war. When the Nazis came, they stole her entire collection and killed most of her family. I felt like I was learning about my own family for the first time. My grandmother never told me any of this. Because she was terrified, Marcus continued. She'd spent her entire life hiding from the people who killed her family. When the ring surfaced in her possession, she thought they'd found her. But they had found her, Rachel said quietly. Yes. And when she tried to work with us to expose them, they made sure she understood the consequences of fighting back. We drove in silence for several miles, each of us processing the magnitude of what we were up against. I watched familiar landmarks disappear behind us, marking our passage from the life I'd known into something completely unknown. The evidence, I said suddenly. David's files. Do we still have them? Marcus patted his jacket pocket. Digital copies, encrypted and stored in multiple locations. But the originals were in the safe house that's been compromised. So we have proof of everything they've done. We have proof of some of what they've done, Marcus corrected. David was careful, but he was also paranoid. He kept the most damaging information separate from the operational files. Rachel looked up from her phone, where she'd been frantically taking notes. Where? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made me turn to study his profile. That, he said, is where things get complicated. Because the most damaging evidence isn't hidden in some safety deposit box or secret vault. It's hidden in plain sight, in a place the Heritage Foundation would never think to look. Where? I asked, though something in his tone made me dread the answer. Marcus looked at me, his eyes reflecting a burden I was only beginning to understand. It's hidden in you, Elle. In your medical records, your family history, your DNA. David embedded evidence in your grandmother's medical files before she died. Everything they've done, everyone they've killed, it's all documented in the genetic markers that prove your family's connection to the stolen artwork. The car seemed to spin around me as the implications hit. I wasn't just a victim of the Heritage Foundation's crimes. I was the key to exposing them, and now they knew exactly where to find me. The roadside diner Marcus chose looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s, with cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lights that hummed ominously overhead. It was exactly the kind of place people would overlook, which I was beginning to understand was the point. We sat in a corner booth with our backs to the wall, Marcus's eyes constantly scanning the entrance while Rachel and I tried to process what he'd just told us. My medical records, I said for the third time, stirring coffee that had long since gone cold. David Kellerman somehow put evidence of international crimes into my medical records. Not just evidence, Marcus corrected, pulling out a tablet I'd never seen before. A complete archive. Names, dates, financial records, photographs, everything the Heritage Foundation has done for the past 30 years, encoded into genetic markers and embedded in your hospital files. Rachel leaned forward, her reporter instincts overriding her fear. That's impossible. You can't hide information in DNA samples. You can't hide traditional information, Marcus agreed, tapping the tablet screen. But you can hide digital information. In the metadata of genetic tests, in the annotations of medical imaging, in the supposedly random variations of routine blood work. David was a genius at this kind of thing, hiding intelligence in plain sight. I thought about all the medical tests I'd undergone over the years, the routine physicals and blood draws I'd never questioned. How long has this been going on? Since you were 22. Right after your grandmother died, you started having those fainting spells, remember? You went through months of testing to rule out heart problems, genetic disorders, anything that might have caused them. The memory came flooding back, weeks of specialists, EKGs, genetic screenings, blood tests that seemed to go on forever. The doctors had never found anything wrong, attributing the episodes to stress and grief. Eventually, they'd stopped, and I'd forgotten about them entirely. The fainting spells were induced, Marcus continued, his voice carrying a guilt I was only beginning to understand. David needed a medical reason to justify extensive testing. He was embedding the evidence in your files piece by piece, test by test. You mean you poisoned me? The words came out sharper than I intended, drawing looks from the other diners. Low-dose sedatives, Marcus said quietly. Nothing that would cause permanent damage, just enough to create symptoms that would require investigation. I didn't know what he was really doing, Elle. I thought he was just being thorough, making sure the stress of your grandmother's death wasn't affecting your health. Rachel was typing frantically on her phone, her journalistic mind already racing ahead to implications. So Elena is literally carrying around evidence that could destroy this entire network. She's not just carrying it, she's become the archive itself, Marcus said. David was paranoid about digital storage, about files being hacked or destroyed. He figured the one place the Heritage Foundation would never think to look was inside the medical records of their target's granddaughter. The waitress approached our table, coffee pot in hand, but Marcus waved her away with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The diner was nearly empty now, just us and an elderly man reading a newspaper at the counter, but I could see Marcus cataloging every person, every exit, every potential threat. There's more, he said, once the waitress had moved on. The genetic markers aren't just random storage, they're actually mapping your family's connection to the stolen artwork. Every piece the Nazis took from your great-great-grandmother's collection, every crime the Heritage Foundation committed to keep those pieces hidden, it's all tied together through your DNA. That's insane, Rachel breathed. You're talking about turning a person into a living database. David was insane, Marcus agreed. Brilliant, but completely obsessed with creating the perfect intelligence archive. He called it the Bloodline Project, using genetic inheritance to preserve evidence of historical crimes. I felt sick. For 10 years, I'd been walking around carrying the secrets that had gotten people killed, and I hadn't even known it. Every time I'd gone to the doctor, every routine checkup, I'd been unwittingly maintaining an archive of murder and theft. How do we access it? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Marcus hesitated, and I could see him weighing how much more truth I could handle. The key is in the ring, he said finally. The specific atomic structure of the diamonds creates a resonance pattern that unlocks the encryption in your medical files. Without the ring, the information just looks like normal test results. But with the ring? With the ring, any qualified technician can extract a complete record of 30 years of Heritage Foundation crimes. Bank accounts, shell companies, assassination orders, everything. Rachel looked up from her phone, her face pale. I've been researching the Heritage Foundation. There are references going back to the 1950s, but they're always in connection with legitimate cultural preservation efforts. Museums, university programs, government advisory committees. Perfect cover, Marcus said grimly. Who's going to question an organization dedicated to preserving historical artifacts? They've been operating in plain sight for decades, using their legitimate activities to launder stolen goods and hide their criminal operations. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it automatically before Marcus could stop me. The number was unknown, but the message made my blood run cold. Dr. Morrison, we have something that belongs to you. Trade yourself for your parents, and everyone lives. Refuse, and everyone dies. The phone slipped from my nerveless fingers, clattering onto the formica table. Marcus grabbed it immediately, his face darkening as he read the message. They have Mom and Dad, I whispered, the words barely audible. Rachel reached across the table and grabbed my hand. What do you mean they have them? They're supposed to be in Florida visiting Aunt Margaret. Marcus was already typing on his tablet, pulling up what looked like surveillance feeds. They intercepted them at the airport. Your parents never made it to their flight. The images that appeared on the screen were grainy but clear enough, my parents being escorted through what looked like a parking garage by two men in dark suits. Mom looked frightened but unharmed, while Dad had his arm around her in the protective gesture he'd used my whole life whenever he sensed danger. Are they okay? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. For now, Marcus said. The Heritage Foundation doesn't kill people unless they have to. Your parents are leverage, not targets. Unless I don't cooperate. You can't seriously be considering trading yourself, Rachel said, her grip on my hand tightening. If they get you, they get the evidence. Everyone these people have killed will have died for nothing. If I don't trade myself, they'll kill my parents. I could hear my voice rising again and forced myself to speak more quietly. I can't live with that. Marcus closed the tablet and leaned back in the booth, his expression thoughtful. There might be another way. What kind of way? The Heritage Foundation thinks they need you alive to access the archive. They don't realize that David built in a failsafe. Marcus pulled the ring box from his jacket pocket, setting it carefully on the table between us. If something happens to you, the archive automatically transmits itself to every major news organization and law enforcement agency in the world. Rachel's eyes lit up with understanding. A dead man's switch. Exactly. David was paranoid about his own organization betraying him, so he made sure that killing you would guarantee exposure rather than prevent it. But do they know that? I asked. Marcus's smile was grim. They're about to find out. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. The phone rang twice before a voice answered, male, professional, with an accent I couldn't place. Mr. Morrison, the voice said. We've been expecting your call. Marcus put the phone on speaker, his eyes never leaving my face. You have something that doesn't belong to you. We have insurance, the voice corrected. Your wife's parents are quite comfortable, I assure you. They've been given excellent accommodations while we wait for Dr. Morrison to come home. She's not coming, Marcus said flatly. There was a pause. I think you misunderstand the situation, Mr. Morrison. We're not making a request. And I think you misunderstand what you're dealing with. Marcus leaned forward, his voice taking on an edge that made me shiver. Kill Elena Morrison, and within 6 hours every piece of evidence David Kellerman collected will be transmitted to the FBI, Interpol, the International Court of Justice, and every major newspaper in the world. Your entire operation will be exposed. Another pause, longer this time. You're bluffing. David called it the bloodline protocol, Marcus continued. Elena's biometric data is monitored continuously. If her heart stops, if her brainwaves cease, if she's unconscious for more than 8 hours, the archive transmits automatically. You can't torture the information out of her, you can't drug her into compliance, and you certainly can't kill her. I stared at Marcus, realizing this was the first time I'd heard about the monitoring system. How many other safeguards had David built around me without my knowledge? Interesting, the voice said finally. But irrelevant. We don't need to hurt Dr. Morrison to get what we want. We just need to hurt the people she loves. The line went dead, and we sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the threat hanging over us like a storm cloud. They're going to kill them, I said quietly. No, Marcus shook his head. They're going to threaten to kill them, maybe hurt them enough to make the threat credible, but they won't actually do it. Dead hostages have no value. Rachel was staring at the ring box, her mind clearly working through possibilities. What if we gave them what they want? Not Elena, but the archive itself. Impossible, Marcus said. The encryption is tied to Elena's specific genetic markers. Without her, the archive is just meaningless data. But what if it wasn't? Rachel's eyes were bright with an idea that made me nervous. What if we created a fake archive? Something convincing enough to buy Elena's parents time to escape? Marcus considered this, his fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm that reminded me of the way he approached complex architectural problems. It would have to be perfect. These people have access to the same technology David used to create the original archive. They'd spot a fake within hours. Hours might be enough, I said, understanding beginning to dawn. If we can make them think they have what they want, even temporarily, they'll have to release my parents to preserve their cover. Or they'll kill everyone to eliminate witnesses. Marcus countered. My phone buzzed again, another message from the unknown number. This one contained a single photograph, my mother, clearly frightened but trying to look brave, holding up a newspaper with today's date. They're escalating, Marcus observed, studying the image. Professional kidnappers don't usually provide proof of life this quickly unless they're under pressure themselves. What kind of pressure? The kind that comes from having their entire operation exposed. Marcus pulled up news feeds on his tablet, scrolling through headlines I hadn't seen. Look at this, 3 Heritage Foundation board members resigned overnight, citing personal reasons. 2 of their shell companies had their assets frozen by the Treasury Department. Someone's been feeding information to authorities. Rachel leaned over to read the headlines, her expression growing more excited. This is huge. If the network is already collapsing, maybe we have more leverage than we think. Or maybe we're walking into a trap, I said, voicing the fear that had been growing in my chest. What if this is exactly what they want? What if they're using my parents to flush us out of hiding so they can eliminate all the loose ends at once? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a certainty that both comforted and terrified me. Then we make sure we're not the ones who get eliminated. He stood up from the booth and pulled out his wallet, leaving enough cash to cover our untouched food and a generous tip. There's something I haven't told you about the archive, he said as we prepared to leave. David didn't just hide evidence in your medical records, he hid the locations of the stolen artwork itself. What do you mean? Every piece the Heritage Foundation has moved, every hiding place they've used, every buyer they've sold to, it's all mapped in your genetic data. Elena, you're not just carrying evidence of their crimes. You're carrying the keys to recovering billions of dollars worth of stolen history. The magnitude of this revelation hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just a witness to murder and theft, I was the key to undoing 70 years of cultural destruction. That's why they're getting desperate, Rachel said, understanding flickering in her eyes. It's not just about covering up what they've done. It's about protecting what they still have. Exactly. Marcus held the door open as we left the diner, his eyes already scanning the parking lot for threats. And it's why we're Going to end this tonight. As we walked toward the car, I felt the weight of history on my shoulders. Not just my grandmother's history, or my family's history, but the history of countless families whose heritage had been stolen and hidden. The ring in Marcus's pocket wasn't just jewelry, it was the key to returning stolen souls to their rightful resting places, but first, we had to save my parents. And to do that, we were going to have to walk directly into the heart of the Heritage Foundation's operation, carrying with us the very evidence that could destroy them all. The irony wasn't lost on me. To save the people I loved most, I was going to have to risk becoming the weapon that could finally bring justice to everyone the Heritage Foundation had wronged. Where are we going? I asked as Marcus started the engine. To see a friend, he said, pulling out of the parking lot with the careful attention of someone who knew they were being hunted. Someone who's been waiting 12 years for the chance to help us finish what David started. As we drove deeper into the afternoon, toward whatever confrontation awaited us, I found myself thinking about my grandmother. About the fear she'd carried in her final days, and the hope she'd never lived to see fulfilled. Tonight, I realized, I would either honor her memory by exposing the truth that had killed her, or I would join her as another casualty of the Heritage Foundation's determination to keep their secrets buried. Either way, the lies were finally going to end. The warehouse district looked abandoned in the fading afternoon light, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls that spoke of industrial decay and forgotten dreams. Marcus navigated through narrow streets with the confidence of someone who'd been here before, finally pulling up to a building that looked no different from the dozens of others we'd passed. "This is where your friend lives?" Rachel asked, eyeing the cracked concrete and rusted fire escapes with obvious skepticism. "Lives, works, and runs one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations on the East Coast," Marcus replied, already scanning the surrounding buildings with the careful attention I was beginning to recognize as second nature. "Dr. Sarah Chen doesn't believe in drawing attention to herself." The name hit me like a physical blow. "Chen? As in Mrs. Chen, our neighbor?" Marcus turned to look at me, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach clench with a new kind of dread. What do you think the odds are that the Heritage Foundation's most wanted intelligence analyst just happened to move in next door to us 3 years ago? I thought about Mrs. Chen, always so friendly, always asking about my work at the hospital, always seeming to know a little too much about our schedules and routines. The woman who'd been watering her garden this morning while our house burned 2 doors down. "She's been watching us," I said, the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. "She's been protecting us," Marcus corrected. "Sarah Chen is the one who's been monitoring the bloodline protocol. She's been tracking the Heritage Foundation's movements, intercepting their communications, and keeping us alive for the past 3 years." Rachel was staring at both of us as if we'd lost our minds. "Are you telling me that Elena's sweet elderly neighbor is some kind of spy? Former NSA cryptographer, current freelance intelligence analyst, and the only person alive who understands how David's archive system really works," Marcus said, getting out of the car. "Also, she's 38, not elderly. The gray hair and conservative wardrobe are part of her cover." As if summoned by our conversation, a door in the warehouse wall opened, revealing a woman who looked nothing like the Mrs. Chen I'd known for years. Gone were the floral dresses and sensible shoes, replaced by tactical pants and a black sweater that emphasized a lean, athletic build I'd never noticed before. Her hair was still gray, but pulled back in a severe ponytail that highlighted sharp cheekbones and intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. "You're late," she said, her voice carrying none of the gentle accent I remembered. "And you brought a reporter." "Rachel's Elena's sister," Marcus explained, approaching with his hands visible, a gesture that spoke volumes about the kind of person we were dealing with. "She's already involved." Involved and informed are 2 different things. Sarah's gaze shifted to me, and I felt like I was being analyzed by a sophisticated computer. "Dr. Morrison, you look exactly like your great-great-grandmother. Sarah Goldstein was a remarkable woman." "You knew her?" I asked, though given everything else I'd learned today, I wasn't sure why this surprised me. "I've been studying her for 12 years, ever since David first told me about the Bloodline Project." Sarah stepped aside to let us enter the warehouse, and I gasped at what I saw inside. The interior looked like something from a science fiction movie, banks of computer monitors displaying data streams I couldn't begin to understand, walls covered with photographs and documents connected by colored string like something from a conspiracy theorist's fever dream, and equipment that hummed with the quiet efficiency of serious computing power. "This is incredible," Rachel breathed, pulling out her phone to take pictures before Sarah's sharp voice stopped her. "No recordings, no photographs, no social media posts. What you see here doesn't exist, and neither do I if anyone asks." Sarah moved to one of the computer stations, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards simultaneously. "We have approximately 4 hours before the Heritage Foundation realizes their main tactical advantage has been compromised." "What tactical advantage?" I asked, following her deeper into the maze of equipment. "The belief that you don't know what you're carrying." Sarah pulled up what looked like a real-time map dotted with red and blue markers. "For 10 years, they've been tracking you passively, content to let you walk around as a living archive while they consolidated power and eliminated threats. But the moment you opened that ring box, everything changed." She pointed to a cluster of red markers moving across the map in what looked like search patterns. "These are Heritage Foundation assets, surveillance teams, tactical units, cleanup crews. As of 6 hours ago, they shifted from passive monitoring to active hunting." Marcus moved to stand beside her, studying the display with grim familiarity. "They're mobilizing everything they have." "Everything," Sarah confirmed. 47 active operatives, 13 shell companies, and approximately $200 million in liquid assets. All focused on one objective: capturing or killing Dr. Elena Morrison before she can be used to expose their operation. The weight of being hunted by such overwhelming force settled over me like a suffocating blanket. $200 million? Just to stop me? "Elena, you're not just carrying evidence of their crimes," Sarah said, turning to face me with an intensity that made me take a step back. "You're carrying the locations of nearly $3 billion worth of stolen artwork. Pieces that the Heritage Foundation has spent decades acquiring, hiding, and preparing to sell to private collectors." She pulled up another screen showing photographs of paintings, sculptures, and artifacts that took my breath away. Even to my untrained eye, they were clearly masterpieces, works that belonged in museums, not hidden in some criminal's private vault. Van Gogh, Monet, Picasso, Da Vinci sketches that were thought lost forever, Sarah continued, scrolling through image after image of stolen beauty. "All of it mapped in your genetic markers, waiting for the right resonance frequency to unlock their locations." Rachel was staring at the screens with the wide-eyed fascination of someone watching their biggest story unfold in real time. "This is bigger than Watergate. This is bigger than anything. Which is why they'll do anything to stop it from coming out," Marcus said grimly. "Including killing Elena's parents to force her compliance." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "At the mention of my parents. David and Margaret Morrison are being held at a Heritage Foundation safe house in Baltimore. 12 operatives on site, rotating shifts, professional security protocols." "You've been monitoring them?" I asked, hope flaring in my chest. "I've been monitoring everything," Sarah replied, pulling up surveillance feeds that showed my parents in what looked like a comfortable apartment. They appeared unharmed but clearly frightened, sitting together on a couch while 2 armed guards stood nearby. "The Heritage Foundation wants you to see these images, wants you to know they have your parents. They're counting on your emotional response to override your strategic thinking." "It's working," I admitted. "I can't think clearly when I'm looking at them like that." "Then don't look," Sarah said simply, closing the surveillance feeds. "Look at this instead." The new screen showed a schematic of what looked like a building's floor plan, with red dots marking guard positions and green lines indicating possible entry routes. "The Baltimore safe house," Marcus realized. "And our way in," Sarah confirmed. "The Heritage Foundation has excellent security protocols, but they have one critical weakness: they're used to being the hunters, not the hunted. They've never had to defend against someone who understands their systems as well as I do." She moved to another workstation, and suddenly the warehouse filled with the sound of intercepted radio communications. Voices speaking in code, reporting positions and status updates with military precision. "I've been inside their communication network for 6 months, Sarah explained. "They don't know it yet, but every order they give, every plan they make, Every move they consider, I know about it before their own operatives do. The tactical advantage this represented was staggering, but it also raised questions that made me uncomfortable. How long have you really been watching us? Sarah's smile was enigmatic. Elena, do you remember the food poisoning you had 18 months ago? The one that sent you to the emergency room for dehydration? I nodded, remembering the miserable night of vomiting and fever that had seemed to come from nowhere. Heritage Foundation operatives slipped ricin into your coffee at the hospital cafeteria. Not enough to kill you, just enough to make you sick enough to require blood tests. Sarah's voice carried a casual tone that was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. I neutralized the ricin with a competing agent before it could cause serious damage, but I had to let you get sick enough to maintain the illusion. The revelation hit me like a slap. You've been poisoning me too? I've been saving your life, Sarah corrected. 17 assassination attempts in the last 3 years. Poison in your coffee, a bomb in your car that I defused, snipers that I redirected, even a staged accident involving a drunk driver that I prevented by having his car towed before he could reach your route home. Marcus was staring at Sarah with something approaching awe. 17 attempts? I only knew about 5. Because I made sure you only had to worry about the ones I couldn't handle alone. Sarah's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing grocery lists rather than murder attempts. The Heritage Foundation has been trying to kill Elena for years, but they've also been trying to keep her alive long enough to extract the archive. It creates interesting tactical opportunities for someone willing to exploit their contradictory objectives. Rachel had been quietly taking notes throughout this conversation, but now she looked up with the kind of expression that meant she'd spotted something everyone else had missed. The investigative job at Channel 7, she said suddenly. The one covering art theft and money laundering. That wasn't a coincidence either, was it? Sarah's smile was genuinely pleased, as if Rachel had passed some kind of test. Very good. The Heritage Foundation has been placing their people in media organizations for decades, making sure that any investigations into their activities get buried or misdirected. They offered you that position because they wanted to control what stories got told about art theft in this city. But they didn't know I was Elena's sister. They knew, Sarah corrected. They were planning to use you as additional leverage against Elena if their other methods failed. Your new editor was going to give you assignments that would put you in direct contact with their operatives, possibly getting you killed in the process of gathering information they wanted suppressed. The systematic nature of the manipulation was breathtaking. Every aspect of our lives had been shaped by this conflict, every choice we'd made influenced by forces we hadn't even known existed. So what's the plan? Marcus asked, moving to study the building schematics more closely. How do we get Elena's parents out without giving the Heritage Foundation what they want? Sarah pulled up a new screen showing what looked like a complex timeline with multiple branching paths. We give them exactly what they want, just not in the way they expect. Meaning we use Elena as bait. Sarah's voice carried a calm certainty that made my blood run cold. The Heritage Foundation wants the living archive? They get it. But on our terms, in our location, with our backup plan. I stared at the timeline, trying to understand the strategy she was proposing. You want me to turn myself in? I want you to appear to turn yourself in, Sarah corrected. While actually walking into the most sophisticated intelligence trap ever constructed. By the time they realize what's happening, every Heritage Foundation operative in the country will be documented, tracked, and ready for simultaneous arrest by federal authorities. And if something goes wrong? Rachel asked quietly. Sarah's expression grew serious. If something goes wrong, Elena dies, the archive transmits automatically, and the Heritage Foundation collapses anyway. But Elena dies. The stark reality of the choice settled over us like a shroud. I could play it safe and hope the Heritage Foundation would eventually lose interest, while my parents remained prisoners and countless families never recovered their stolen heritage. Or I could risk everything on Sarah's plan, potentially saving my parents and exposing the truth, but with the very real possibility of dying in the process. I thought about my grandmother, about the fear in her eyes during those final days. About all the people who had died to keep the Heritage Foundation's secrets buried. About the billions of dollars worth of stolen culture that remained hidden. While families grieved for history they would never recover, the choice, when I really considered it, wasn't a choice at all. What do I need to do? I asked. Sarah's smile was fierce and approving. You need to walk into the most dangerous situation you've ever faced, carrying the most valuable intelligence in the world, and trust that we'll be able to keep you alive long enough to use it. That's all? That's everything, Sarah replied. But first, we need to make sure you understand exactly what you're carrying, and exactly how to use it when the time comes. She led me to a chair surrounded by medical equipment I didn't recognize, monitors, scanners, devices that hummed with electronic complexity. Elena Morrison, Sarah said as she began attaching sensors to my arms and temples, meet your great-great-grandmother's legacy. It's time you two were properly introduced. As the machines came online and data began flowing across the monitors, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family, my identity, and my purpose was about to change one more time, but this time, I was ready for it. The scanning equipment hummed to life around me, and suddenly the monitors erupted with data I'd never seen before. Numbers, coordinates, names, faces, all of it flowing from my own genetic markers like a river of hidden history finally allowed to run free. My God, Rachel whispered, staring at the screens. It's all there. Everything. Sarah's fingers danced across the keyboards, organizing the flood of information into comprehensible patterns. Elena, what you're seeing is the complete Heritage Foundation archive. Every crime, every theft, every murder, all of it encoded in your DNA and triggered by the ring's specific atomic resonance. I watched in fascination as the data sorted itself into categories. Bank accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. Shipping manifests for artwork moving between continents. Photographs of Heritage Foundation board members shaking hands with senators, judges, and foreign dignitaries. Death certificates for people who had gotten too close to the truth. There, Marcus said, pointing to a cluster of coordinates appearing on one of the monitors. The Baltimore safe house where they're holding your parents. But Sarah was focused on something else entirely, a stream of real-time communications that had suddenly appeared on her surveillance feeds. They're moving, she announced, her voice carrying a new urgency. The Heritage Foundation is activating their endgame protocol. They're not just coming for Elena anymore, they're preparing to eliminate every potential witness and disappear completely. What does that mean? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. It means they're going to kill your parents whether you surrender or not, Marcus said grimly. They can't afford to leave loose ends if they're planning to vanish. The monitoring equipment was still pulling data from my genetic markers, revealing layers of information I hadn't known existed. As I watched, a new set of coordinates appeared, not for the Baltimore safe house, but for something much larger. Sarah, I said, pointing at the screen. What is that? She looked at the coordinates and went very still. That's the Heritage Foundation's primary archive. Their physical storage facility for the most valuable pieces they've stolen over the decades. Where? According to this, it's less than 20 miles from here. Hidden beneath a legitimate museum in the city. Sarah's voice carried a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Elena, you're not just carrying evidence of their crimes. You're carrying the keys to the largest recovery of stolen cultural artifacts in history. The magnitude of what we'd discovered was overwhelming, but it also clarified our choices in a way that made the path forward obvious. We hit both locations simultaneously, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Sarah coordinates a raid on the archive while Marcus and I get my parents. Elena, that's suicide, Marcus protested. You can't walk into their hands like that. I'm not walking into their hands, I corrected. I'm walking into their trap while carrying a much bigger trap of my own. Sarah pulled up the building schematics. For the Baltimore safe house again, but this time she was highlighting something different: structural weaknesses, communication dead zones, and what looked like ventilation systems. There might be a way, she said slowly. But it would require perfect timing, complete trust, and a willingness to risk everything on a plan that has never been tested. Tell me. Over the next hour, Sarah outlined the most audacious intelligence operation I'd ever heard of. While I walked into the Heritage Foundation's trap, she would use my surrender as a distraction to coordinate simultaneous raids on 12 Heritage Foundation facilities across the country. The genetic archive would be transmitted to federal authorities. The moment I was in custody, providing them with everything they needed to arrest every Heritage Foundation operative simultaneously. The beauty of it, Sarah explained, is that they'll be so focused on you, on getting their hands on the living archive, that they won't notice their entire network being dismantled around them. Until it's too late, Marcus added, though he still looked skeptical about the plan. Exactly. By the time they realize what's happening, they'll be surrounded by federal agents with enough evidence to put them all away for life. Rachel had been quietly taking notes throughout the planning session, but now she looked up with a question that went to the heart of everything. What about Elena's parents? How do we make sure they survive the raid? Sarah's expression grew serious. That's the part of the plan that requires the most trust. Elena has to get to them before the federal raid begins, and she has to do it while convincing the Heritage Foundation that she's surrendering unconditionally. How? By actually surrendering, I said, understanding the elegant brutality of the plan. I walk in, give them what they think they want, and use the time that buys us to get my parents out. Then Sarah triggers the raids, and we pray we can escape before the shooting starts. The plan was insane, dangerous, and almost certainly doomed to failure. It was also our only chance to save my parents and expose the Heritage Foundation before they disappeared forever. When? Marcus asked quietly. Sarah checked her monitors, where the red dots representing Heritage Foundation assets had moved into what looked like an attack formation around the Baltimore safe house. Now, she said. They're expecting Elena to try to rescue her parents. They're not expecting her to surrender herself as part of a coordinated federal operation. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah equipped me with communication devices so small they were practically invisible, programmed with frequencies that would allow her to track my location and monitor the Heritage Foundation's communications. Marcus checked and rechecked weapons. I hoped we wouldn't need to use, while Rachel documented everything with the methodical thoroughness of a journalist who knew she was witnessing history. Remember, Sarah said as we prepared to leave the warehouse, the moment you're inside that building, you're completely on your own. I can guide you through communications, but I can't protect you. Everything depends on your ability to convince them that you've given up. I haven't given up, I said firmly. I'm just changing tactics. The drive to Baltimore took 2 hours, during which Marcus and I barely spoke. There was too much to say, and not enough words to say it. We both knew that there was a very real possibility that one or both of us wouldn't survive the next few hours. Marcus said finally, as we approached the city limits. I need you to know that everything I told you about falling in love with you was true. Meeting you was the best accident of my life. I know, I replied, reaching for his hand. And Marcus? When this is over, we're going to have a very long conversation about trust and honesty and what a real marriage looks like. But first, we're going to save my parents and stop these bastards from hurting anyone else. The Heritage Foundation safe house looked like an ordinary apartment building from the outside, but Sarah's intelligence had revealed the extensive security modifications hidden beneath its mundane facade. As we sat in the car across the street, I could see guards at the entrance trying to look casual while maintaining positions that gave them clear fields of fire. Sarah, are you receiving? I whispered into the tiny microphone hidden in my collar. Clear. Signal, came the immediate response through the equally tiny earpiece. Federal teams are in position at all target locations. You are go for approach. I kissed Marcus one more time, tasting salt tears that could have been mine or his, then got out of the car and walked across the street toward what might be the last decision I would ever make. The guards recognized me immediately, apparently. They'd been given very detailed descriptions of their target. Instead of stopping me, they escorted me into the building with the kind of professional courtesy that was somehow more frightening than hostility would have been. The elevator ride to the 6th floor felt eternal. When the doors opened, I found myself facing a hallway that looked perfectly normal except for the 2 armed men positioned at either end. Dr. Morrison, one of them said politely. Thank you for coming. Your parents are eager to see you. The apartment door opened to reveal a scene that was both exactly what I'd expected and somehow worse than I'd imagined. My parents sat on the couch where I'd seen them in the surveillance footage, but now I could see the fear in their eyes. The way my mother's hands trembled despite her attempts to appear calm. Elena. Dad started to stand, but a gesture from one of the guards made him sit back down. I'm here, I said, trying to project calm confidence while my heart hammered against my ribs. Everything's going to be okay. The man who seemed to be In charge stepped forward, mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of bland face that would be forgotten within minutes of meeting him. Dr. Morrison, I'm Thomas Hartwell, Director of Heritage Foundation Security. Thank you for accepting our invitation. I didn't realize kidnapping my parents qualified as an invitation. Hartwell's smile was coldly professional. Desperate times require creative solutions. Now, shall we get down to business? You have something we need, and we have something you want. I want my parents released unharmed. Of course. But first, we need to verify that you're carrying what we believe you're carrying. Hartwell nodded to one of his men, who produced a device that looked like a sophisticated medical scanner. A simple genetic resonance test. It won't hurt. I submitted to the scanning with as much grace as I could manage, knowing that Sarah was monitoring every word of our conversation and that federal agents were moving into position around Heritage Foundation facilities across the country. The scanner beeped, and Hartwell's expression shifted to one of genuine satisfaction. Remarkable, he said, studying the readout. David Kellerman's final masterpiece. A living archive of our entire operation, embedded in the genetic code of his target's granddaughter. Brilliant and completely insane. You have your verification, I said. Release my parents. Not quite yet. Hartwell moved to the window, gazing out at the city below with the air of a man who owned everything he could see. You see, Dr. Morrison, the Heritage Foundation has been preparing for this moment. For quite some time. We always knew that David's obsession with genetic archives would eventually surface, and we've developed the technology to extract that information without requiring your continued cooperation. The implication hit me like ice water. They didn't need me alive after all. However, Hartwell continued, the extraction process is quite traumatic. Fatal, actually. So we wanted to give you the opportunity to cooperate voluntarily before we move to more permanent solutions. What do you want me to do? Simply allow us to download the archive using the ring as a resonance key. The process takes about 6 hours, during which you'll remain conscious and able to say goodbye to your parents. Then, regrettably, we'll need to eliminate all witnesses to maintain operational security. I felt Sarah's voice in my earpiece, so quiet it was barely a whisper. Federal teams ready. Keep them talking. And if I refuse? I asked Hartwell. Then we begin the extraction immediately, and your parents die first. Either way, Dr. Morrison, this ends tonight. I looked at my parents, saw the fear and love warring in their expressions, and made my choice. I'll cooperate, I said. But I want to spend those 6 hours with my parents. No guards in the room, no weapons pointed at us. Just family time before it ends. Hartwell considered this, then nodded to his men. Very well. A reasonable final request. As the guards stepped back, I moved to the couch and sat between my parents, taking their hands in mine. To anyone watching, it would look like a daughter saying goodbye to the people she loved most in the world. What they couldn't see was the small device Sarah had given me, now pressed against my father's palm, transmitting a signal that would tell the federal teams exactly where we were in the building. I love you both, I whispered, loud enough for the Heritage Foundation operatives to hear. And I'm so sorry for getting you involved in this. We love you too, sweetheart, Mom replied, and I felt her squeeze my hand in the pattern Sarah had taught me, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The message was received and understood. Sarah, I breathed into my microphone, barely moving my lips. Execute. What followed was the most precisely coordinated law enforcement operation I had ever witnessed. Across the country, 12 Heritage Foundation facilities were raided simultaneously. In the apartment where we sat, federal agents rappelled down from the roof and burst through windows with the synchronized precision of a military strike. Hartwell spun toward the commotion, his hand reaching for a weapon that would never clear its holster. Around him, his operatives found themselves facing overwhelming force from agents who had been planning this raid for hours with perfect intelligence about their positions and capabilities. Federal agents. The shout filled the apartment. Everyone. On the ground now. I threw myself over my parents, shielding them from the chaos erupting around us. Through the noise and confusion, I could hear Sarah's voice in my earpiece, archive transmitted successfully. All Heritage Foundation assets in custody. Elena, you did it. In less than 5 minutes, it was over. Thomas Hartwell sat in handcuffs, his expression shifting from arrogant control to stunned disbelief as federal agents read him his rights. Around him, his men submitted to arrest with the resigned professionalism of people who knew the game was over. "Dr. Morrison?" One of the federal agents approached our couch carefully. "I'm Agent Sarah Williams with the FBI. Are you and your parents injured?" "We're okay," I managed, though my voice was shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline and terror. "Are you really Agent Williams, or is this another Heritage Foundation trick?" The woman smiled, and I saw something familiar in her expression. "Actually, I'm Agent Chen. Sarah Chen. We haven't been properly introduced." 2 hours later, we sat in an FBI debriefing room while federal agents from multiple agencies asked questions, documented our statements, and tried to process the magnitude of what the Heritage Foundation archive contained. The genetic data I'd been carrying had provided locations for over 300 pieces of stolen artwork, identified corruption networks in 17 countries, and given federal authorities enough evidence to guarantee convictions for everyone involved in the organization. "The recovery operations will take months," Agent Chen explained as the formal debriefing concluded. "But preliminary estimates suggest we're looking at the largest repatriation of stolen cultural artifacts in history. Families that have been searching for their heritage for decades will finally get it back." Marcus sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders, both of us still processing everything that had happened. "What happens to us now?" "Now you go home," Agent Chen said. "Well, you find a new home, since yours was destroyed this morning. But you go back to your lives, with the knowledge that you've helped close one of the longest-running criminal conspiracies in modern history." "And the ring?" I asked, touching the velvet box that had started this entire nightmare. "The ring goes back where it belongs," Agent Chen replied. "To you, Dr. Morrison. It was always your family's property. The Heritage Foundation never had any legal claim to it." 3 months later, Rachel's investigative series on the Heritage Foundation aired on Channel 7, earning her a Pulitzer Prize nomination and a permanent position with the network's investigative team. The series had been watched by over 50 million people and had sparked congressional investigations into art theft and cultural repatriation that were still ongoing. Marcus and I were rebuilding our marriage along with our lives, learning to trust each other with truths that were sometimes difficult but always honest. Our new house had better security and fewer secrets, and Marcus had left his undercover work to return to architecture, though he still consulted occasionally with federal agencies on cases involving international art theft. My parents had moved closer to us, partly for security reasons but mostly because the events in Baltimore had reminded us all how precious and fragile family connections could be. They'd also become unlikely celebrities in their retirement community, dining out on stories of their brief career as federal informants, but it was the letter that arrived on a Tuesday morning in spring that brought everything full circle. "Elena." Marcus called from the kitchen, where he was sorting through our mail. "This one's addressed to you, but the return address just says, Vienna." I opened the envelope carefully, still occasionally paranoid about unexpected correspondence, and found myself reading a letter that made me cry. "Dear Dr. Morrison," it began in elegant handwriting. "My name is David Goldstein, and I believe you knew my great-grandmother, Sarah Goldstein. Thanks to your courage and the evidence you helped expose, my family has recovered 17 pieces of artwork that were stolen from us during the war. But more than that, we've recovered our history, our heritage, and our identity as a family. The ring that started this journey has helped dozens of families reclaim what was stolen from them. We will never be able to thank you enough, but we wanted you to know that Sarah's memory lives on in the beauty that has finally come home." That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried, carrying the ring in its velvet box and David Goldstein's letter in my pocket. I sat beside her headstone for a long time, telling her about everything that had happened, about the justice that had finally arrived, and about the families who were being reunited with their stolen heritage. As I prepared to leave, I opened the ring box one final time, watching the late afternoon sun catch the diamonds and throw rainbow light across my grandmother's grave. "Don't open it. Can't you see it?" Marcus had said that first morning, terrified of what the ring might unleash. He'd been right to be afraid. Opening that box had destroyed our old life, exposed deadly secrets, and nearly gotten us all killed. But It had also brought justice to people who had been waiting 70 years for someone to care about their stolen history. It had reunited families with their heritage and ensured that the crimes of the Heritage Foundation would never be repeated. Sometimes, I realized as I closed the ring box and headed home to my husband and my new life, the most dangerous thing you can do is also the most necessary, and sometimes, the gifts that scare us the most are the ones that change the world. The end. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.